Another big severe weather event will be coming to the United States today and tomorrow, where more damaging winds, large hail, and a few tornadoes will be possible anywhere from the Midwest and the Central Plains back into the Southern Plains and even the lower Mississippi Valley. So in today's forecast, we're going to break down everything that you need to know about the severe weather event today and tomorrow, and why we could also see a big lull in severe weather once we go into next week. So let's begin with what's happening across the United States today in terms of the severe weather risk, which you'll notice it is a very large area. Not as large as yesterday, but we do have a large marginal threat that goes from the Midwest back into Texas, and there's also a couple of slight risks for severe weather. We have one back over in the Midwest from the remnants of a mesoscale convective vortex, which will bring some damaging winds, large hail, and maybe even a couple of tornadoes back over in parts of Illinois and Wisconsin. So we might go live for this later today, so make sure you're subscribed to the channel. And then further down to the south, I think the weather will actually be more active overall than some people might be anticipating. I think we're going to have about 2 or 3 different rounds of storms in various areas. There will be a big cluster of storms this morning that'll bring damaging winds and maybe even a brief tornado threat. But I think as we go into the afternoon and early evening, we're going to have a better shot at maybe a couple of tornadoes, especially right along the Red River Valley in Oklahoma and Texas, and perhaps even back over here in Arkansas, northeast Texas, and maybe even into northwestern Louisiana. Now, the main concern for today will be damaging winds. In addition to that, we have a threat for large hail. There will also be a chance for some very large hail if any discrete supercells fire up back over in southwest Oklahoma or even north central Texas later today. So definitely keep that in mind. Make sure that you have a tornado action plan in place as well, because we'll have the chance for even a few tornadoes. That goes anywhere from southwestern Missouri, just south of Joplin and Springfield, back into northern Louisiana and right there into the heart of Texas. Notice, by the way, we do have a 5% tornado risk. This was not there yesterday. They've just added this into the most recent outlook. There might be a little conditional risk here for a couple of tornadoes. That's at least what we're going to be watching for later today. So definitely an area to watch for right along the Red River in northern parts of North Texas and as well as north central Texas. We also have a tiny tornado risk back over in the Midwest where a tornado or two will be possible, but any tornadoes that happen there will be on the briefer and probably the weaker side of things as well. Today's severe weather risk is going to really vary depending on where you are, and we're going to talk about the tornado risk in particular for today. So as we go throughout the morning this morning, we'll have an isolated tornado risk along a narrow corridor as a cluster of storms does continue to push down to the south. Anything that can remain discrete could produce a slightly more elevated tornado risk, but what we're going to be watching for later in the afternoon today, which is something that I might be going live for, would be a conditional tornado risk right along the Red River Valley in southwest Oklahoma and north central Texas. There's going to be a little subtle shortwave trough that's going to enter into this area, and what we're going to have to watch for is a boundary to basically go from south to north, producing potentially like an outflow boundary, going to be able to basically initiate the potential for some supercells. Now, it is a big question mark on whether storms will actually fire up in this environment, but if they do, they will be producing the threat for significant hail, damaging winds, and even a couple of tornadoes as we go throughout the late afternoon into the evening hours tonight. But it is going to be conditional, and overall that tornado risk will only last for maybe 2 to 3 hours. It's not a super big tornado risk overall for today. Now, we'll go into the timing down there in a second. Here's what it looks like in the Central Plains this morning. Cluster of storms moving into Kansas, or southern Kansas into northern Oklahoma. We'll be watching for that storm activity to continue to push down to the south. Anything that can remain discrete could produce an isolated tornado threat all the way into lunchtime. By the afternoon, those storms do continue to push into Arkansas and southeastern Oklahoma, where the main concern there will continue to be the threat for damaging winds, and then again maybe an isolated brief tornado. Once we go into the afternoon hours, that line will push into Arkansas. It might even push into parts of northeast Texas. We'll have some more summertime thunderstorms developing in Louisiana and East Texas, with hail and wind being possible. By the time we get closer to 4, 5, and 6 o'clock, we'll be turning our attention to this potential threat for storms in southwest Oklahoma, the eastern Texas Panhandle, and north central Texas, where a conditional tornado and very large hail threat will exist. We could even see something like that back over in, North Texas, for example, but I think that'll be more of just a wind threat. Now, anything that can survive in this environment, it could actually upscale into potentially a mesoscale convective system going towards North Texas. Even though the HRRR model does not show that, that is a possibility as we go into the late evening, but overall, the uncertainty definitely remains with the overall threat of severe weather there. There's also a chance that we get a mesoscale convective system developing back over in parts of eastern Oklahoma and even into Arkansas. That could even roll into Texas overnight tonight, with damaging winds being possible as well. But I do think the biggest thing for today is going to be watching this area right along the Red River. If storms do get going, a tornado threat will definitely exist, and if that does end up happening, we will be live here on the channel, so make sure that you're subscribed down below. Now, back over in the Midwest, a bit of a different story. We will have a tornado risk here, but notice the tornado parameter values, mostly gray in this area. That represents a low to very low tornado risk for today. Really not a great environment for tornadoes, but the thing is, we're going to have a weakening MCS this morning that'll eventually turn into a small mesoscale convective vortex, and what this could end up doing is spinning up maybe an isolated tornado or two as we go throughout the afternoon and into the early evening tonight. After sunset, storms may be continuing right along the Wisconsin and Illinois border. Could even get a flash flooding threat there if those storms do train, but overall the tornado threat and the severe weather threat will be dying down after sunset. So I think overall the concern for severe weather will begin to dwindle after we go past sunset tonight. But then once we go into tossing trampolines on Tacos Tuesday, the risk for severe weather a bit lower than today. I wouldn't be surprised if we got a slightly larger slight risk for severe weather. Overall, not nearly as intense or as, high of a risk as I was kind of expecting. I thought we might get some sort of enhanced risk somewhere, but nonetheless, we are still looking at some isolated to scattered damaging winds, large hail, and there will also be a low tornado risk back over in parts of Kansas, northwest Missouri, and southeast Nebraska. Now, I would not be panicking about this. Just make sure that you're staying weather aware, as there might be an isolated tornado or two as we go into the late afternoon and evening hours tomorrow. Here's the timing for tomorrow. Storms will begin to fire up more in a linear line of storms as we go into the afternoon hours. Overall, it doesn't look to be super intense, but anything that can stay organized will be producing the threat for some damaging winds. Once we go into the evening hours, those storms will push into Wisconsin and even eastern Iowa, where there will still be an isolated threat for damaging winds. After midnight, storms are starting to wind down. Some storms still lingering in the Great Lakes region, but overall not super concerning. Back over in the Central Plains, storms will fire up really during the late afternoon and into the early evening hours. Anything again that can remain relatively organized will have the potential for damaging winds. There will also be an isolated tornado risk embedded with any storms that can stay semi-discrete or discrete. We could even see a brief tornado if this does become a bit linear, but it's a bit of a lower shot of that happening. Once we go into the late evening, so around 10 to 11 o'clock, most of these storms will start to fall apart, and I think things will start to clear up a little bit as we go into Wednesday morning across the Central Plains. Now, beyond today and tomorrow, things will still remain kind of active depending on where you are. We're gonna have that large low pressure system centered back up here in the southern parts of Canada, just north of North Dakota. This will continue to bring some showers and thunderstorms to the Midwest and the Central Plains, obviously for tomorrow. But once we go into Wednesday, this will start to bring more showers and thunderstorms to the Ohio Valley and the East Coast, where overall the severe weather risk remains relatively low at this time, but it's not zero. Once we go into Thursday into Friday, storms will move into the Northeast, and that'll continue to create an active weather pattern up there. But once we go into the weekend, it'll continue to stay active in the Northeast, but notice we actually could start to get some more showers and thunderstorms in the Central and Southern Plains on Saturday. Now, I do think overall the severe weather threat is not going to be really that organized back down in the Southern Plains for most of the weekend, but we might start to get some more organized low pressure systems as we go into next week by maybe Tuesday or Wednesday, either in the Southern Plains or back into the Central and Northern Plains. Overall, though, no big outbreaks really in the forecast. It looks like for next week. I think things overall will be a little bit quieter across most of the country. We might see something develop, though, in the Southern Plains back into the Dixie Alley, and then maybe something in the Northern Plains and the Midwest, but things still remain very uncertain as we go into the middle of next week. But I definitely do think it'll be a time frame to watch for, and this is the CFS Accumulated Supercell Composite Parameter for next week, so June 9th until June 16th. Right now, when we usually see blues and even greens, it doesn't mean really anything super organized looks likely, but we might end up seeing something in the Northern or Central Plains, and then perhaps back over in the Southern Plains, but that still remains uncertain as we are still several days out from that. Thank you so much for watching. Make sure to hit the like button down below and subscribe if you've not already.